Major support for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
When you look at the recent fortunes and branding of states of South Carolina and North Carolina, you can see a distinct difference. Of course, things like the North Carolina House Bill 2 or the bathroom bill and political infighting doesn't help the Old North state's external image. But arguably in recent years, the Palmetto State, in its own right, has been building upon economic development success after success. And the man at the center of much of that is our guest. Welcome back to the longest running and the most widely watched source of Carolina policy, business, and public affairs. I am Chris William, and on this special Executive Profile series, we will chat with one of South Carolina's longest serving, if not the longest serving, Secretary of Commerce. A man that even before public service worked on marquee economic development projects like the original BMW relocation announcement in 1992 with then South Carolina Governor Campbell. In a moment, the Honorable Bobby Hitt.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. BARINGS, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, an executive profile featuring Bobby Hitt, South Carolina Secretary of Commerce.
Hello, welcome to our program. Obviously, some of the best conversations happen off camera, and that's what we were talking about, some of the history South Carolina Secretary of Commerce Bobby Hitt has had. But, Your Honor, welcome to the program. We're glad to have you back.
I'm delighted to be here, Chris.
You know, it's fascinating, Mr. Secretary. You watch the arc of South Carolina over the last just few years, and every year has been a new high water mark for things like manufacturing activity, capital investment, announcements of relocations. I mean, it's hard to imagine a better scenario. So in 2018, how do you best what happened in 2017? Or are you starting to talk about planning on how to model out, okay, at some point we're going to hit something that slows us down? I mean, what goes on in commerce?
Well, our Commerce Department is a little more streamlined than the one, say, in North Carolina, which also includes tourism and other activity. We are pretty much a streamlined one, just focused on business recruitment and business retention, and fairly small, only about 100 people in the whole agency. So we are very focused on our product. And so as a result, one of the things I've been able to do, and I spent pretty much the first year doing it, was to bring all the counties together, along with the state and our regional alliances, and get us to work in a common way. We call it Team South Carolina. It's working. So that we share, we're a small state, and we share common victories. So that it lands in one county, and the rest of us in the other counties support that very much. And it's hard. It's hard in both of the Carolinas to have even development of economic activity. Both states share a common heritage in that the struggling is trying to move economics into the rural areas as well as into the urban areas. And I don't even have to look at North Carolina. I know it's going to be the same as South Carolina. I've looked at South Carolina a lot, and pretty much the interstate system, the counties that are on the interstate system do very well. They're first cousins, the counties that are right next door do very well. Get one more county out, the transportation system's not as strong, the educational system is starting to dwindle because more of the young people are moving to the urban areas. You start to see the same patterns in both states, and it's hard. So one of the things we've tried to do, trying to do right now, is to take a look at what could we do in some of these rural areas that would make a change, and can we move sort of from the somewhat serendipitous marketing of trying to attract as many companies as we can to maybe a little more rifle shooting and saying, well, this would be the right kind of company for a county like this, which might only be 150 jobs, but in a certain size counties, that's a big deal. 150 families, I look at every job as a family, and that's the way I think about it. So I think that there's always work to do, even if we get to full employment, which is pretty much where we are at 4.1% in South Carolina. It was pretty close to 11 when we started. So yes, there's been a lot of change. And it's good. And it's also, people now have the opportunity to move from a job they may have had for a while at one pay level to a higher order job. And one of the things that's happened in both of the Carolinas over the last 25 years is we've both gone from states that were fairly low-skilled manufacturing states to high-skilled, more complex manufacturing states. And with it, there has been an improvement in standard of living, I think, in both states. I mean, I watch North Carolina a lot. As I tell people all the time, I watch North Carolina and Georgia, same dirt, same people. If you're doing better at something than we are, then I want to know why.
Well, but, you know, arguably, you've taken that, watching North Carolina, for instance, and, you know, South Carolina, and this is not the right way to say it, sir, but you understand what I'm saying. South Carolina, it seems to minimize it by saying it's a little engine that could, because it's an engine that not just could, but has, and has turned into quite the economic development powerhouse, maybe smaller in population, but the number of jobs won will by far pale any state in comparison. So I guess the question is, when you look at North Carolina, when you look at the familial connection that these two states have, are there other opportunities that you could leverage off of the Tar Heel state that also North Carolina could use South Carolina as being kind of an arrow in the quiver, so to speak?
Well, Secretary Copeland and I have talked about that. We know each other, and our senior staffs know each other. And we do a few things. We surprise people every now and then. We do a joint event at a couple of things around the nation, and the two Carolinas being together in an event kind of is a head turner, which we liked. But there's things we can do together. I mean, as I tell people, our international airport is in Charlotte, South Carolina, you know, but it's...
well, and people believe that.
I mean, the growth in Charlotte, I mean, I think is a remarkable piece of where we work together. Charlotte is spilling in all directions. It's in the greater interest for the entire metropolitan area for that growth to continue. When I came in, I looked at I-77 and said that's a 100-mile long industrial park, and we need to go capitalize on it. It's got an international airport at the end of it. And so that's exactly right. So every county along I-77 in South Carolina, with the new alliance that we built all the way down to the capital city in Columbia, is part of that alliance, and we see it as a great industrial area. And in one case, we were trying to recruit a company, and we didn't succeed. And I sat back and looked at it, trying to figure out what we did wrong, and I realized we didn't sell Charlotte well. So the next time we had a shot, I called my friends in Charlotte and said, would you come help me? Which they did. So there is movement back and forth where we help each other. We helped with some other activity. We try to stay quiet about it because sometimes our political friends don't like us being friendly with people on the other side of the line.
But politics follows the dollars, and obviously you've had success in dollar-denominated press. So let me ask you this. One of the biggest things you've talked about over and over and over again for years now has been workforce development. And you, as you well cited, Your Honor, this idea that the unemployment rate is historically low. But you talk about workforce development being kind of the Achilles heel, and that's my term, sir. But so if workforce development is so hard for South Carolina, for North Carolina, for all states, is it really that critical of it? Certainly has to be fixed, but when do we hit a tipping point when it comes to you can't find the talent if no one can find the talent?
Well, remember, the talent is in a continuum. So there are people at starter jobs and people finishing out careers, and that it's always moving up. And so we may find, for instance, right now, just in the last 2 days, I've had people from the transportation industry, meaning the truck drivers, and the construction industry, and some other trade saying, we're hurting too. How can you help us? Because manufacturing and others is pulling resources away. There are jobs that are paying more. People are having more choices in vertical movement in the job market, which is a great thing. But at the same time, we need to be able to build buildings, and we need to be able to move our goods in trucks, so we need both and. And we're all in somewhat of a constraint. So recently, we try to do something different, and again, I think we all get locked into certain ways of thinking, and we need to break out of them. So, for instance, we know that in the low country of South Carolina, because of Volvo, which will build its first car this year, and Mercedes-Benz, which is finishing out their plant with the van plant in Charleston, between those two, we have to develop about 4,000 auto workers in the next 5 years. 4,000. That's a lot.
Yeah.
In a market that's a fairly well-populated, but also 4% unemployment market as well. It's got good in-migration. They're claiming about 40 people a day are moving into the Charleston area. It's the fastest growing area in our state. But we decided to try something different. So we went an old way, and we went out into all these little small communities in northern Berkeley County. Most of them our listeners here have never heard of, little towns of St. Stephen and Macedonia and others that are sort of off the grid. And we held community meetings. We took what I call our posse with us, which was Adult Ed and Ready SC, which is our education group. Volvo is an employer, and SC Works, which is another works agency. And we went out, we went through the churches and others to put out the notice that we were coming. We had 1,400 people show up for 3 community meetings, 2 weeknights and 1 Saturday.
That surprised you?
Yeah, it blew me away. And there were people who I think would maybe once in the past have shown up for a job fair and been pushed away. So they weren't coming. They weren't coming unless we asked them, so to speak. We went out to them and said, hey, there are good jobs out here. We realized that our complex employers require a year of manufacturing experience to even be interviewed. So we got tech to develop a curriculum. It's a 50-hour orientation course that gives you a certificate that's the equivalent of 1 year manufacturing experience, and the employer would accept it. We've had over 200 people go through that in the last 3 months.
Can you draw?
So we're basically creating a workforce for people that are off the grid.
So
we're now taking it on the road.
Well, and that's what. So have you been able to scale that? And can you see that this actually will bear fruit the way that you?
Yeah, it's already bearing fruit. We got people queued up that would not, in my opinion, have ever been queued up before. So we were so happy about it. We did it for Mercedes about a month ago. We had over 1,000 people show up in some of the small communities around Charleston County that, again, most people never heard of. But the simply because the media is all fragmented now. No one knows. There's no way to. How would you tell everybody? You know, come to this job fair. Put an ad in a local newspaper. They don't read it. You know what I'm saying. So we created a different model, and I remember realizing that we wanted to look at some other counties and would require transportation to do it. And I was standing next to Congressman Clyburn, and I said, you know, Jim, I might need some vans. He said, what you doing? I told him. He said, no problem. And I said, I'll only need them for a year. He said, why is that? I said, because within a year they'll have their own car. Welcome to the New South. Yeah, that's the first thing everybody wants. But so I think we have to look at our urban and suburban and rural areas and realize there's opportunity out there, and we have to get people to be drawn to these new opportunities. In the case of Volvo, it's the largest rural project we've ever done. It's not in Charleston. It's 25 miles inland, and it's in a very low density area, so we have to draw from a lot. So one of the things I told my relatives in Charleston, that's where I'm from, don't worry, I'm going to change the flow and start the traffic going inland now. And to some extent that could happen. But I think we just have to not be defeated by the numbers and realize there's movement. We have in-migration. We're one of the fastest growing states in the country, and one of the few that has good in-migration. We've worked hard to look at, we have 8 military installations.
Which is saying something in states that have gone the other way.
Right, and we have a program to reverse recruit the military as they muster out. We have over 4,000 a year muster out, so we're talking to them. We have developed a web campaign. They know a year and 6 months before they muster. Most of them already have families here. They're here. They like the climate. Let's give them a job. They make great manufacturing employees, whatever skill level they have.
You know, one of the big things you touch on, of course, your home section there, the Low Country, Dorchester, Berkeley, Charleston counties, and some of those counties that are more rural. When Volvo went in there, when Boeing went in there, when Nucor went in there years ago, all of a sudden overnight in the last decade,
right.
The critical mass of people living in and around Charleston went through the roof.
Right.
You've got Charlestonians that typically don't want that kind of change.
Those are my relatives. Yeah, I know them pretty well.
Sure. So how have you been able to bridge that? Not just the traditional doctor knows in the world, but how have you been able to manage that kind of growth in a traditionally smaller but parochial area?
Well, remember, there are many Charlestons. I'm always humored by the fact the peninsula itself is actually fairly modest sized, and there's rules about density down there. You can't be over a certain height and so forth and so on. And they're straining them all right now for sure. But I'm always reminded of my dear friend Helen Hill, who's head of tourism down there, runs the Convention and Business Bureau. Absolute remarkable person, deserves a lot of credit for what's going on in Charleston. I remember one year they were talking about naming one of the Coliseums or something, and somebody said they wanted to name it the North Charleston Coliseum, and her comment was, "Oh, honey, when people look it up, they're looking under the seas." So the point being, Charleston is all of this,
yes.
and so Charleston is a bigger thing, and it's a bit of a state of mind, as everybody knows. And so all of the communities have grown remarkably, and all of them are struggling with growth. Growth is something that traditionally in our region of the country we haven't exactly welcomed planning in some ways, and therefore we build something and then we have to bring the infrastructure in to catch up, and maybe we'll figure something out different next time, but it's not easy. And because we have traditionally had low density cities. I mean, we don't have a Charlotte in South Carolina
Yet.
Yeah,
I mean, seems
we have
the
Charlotte.
upstate.
We have Charlotte,
yes.
but we do not have a city of Charlotte's prominence in South Carolina. We don't have an international flight into South Carolina. Maybe that'll change in the next year, and we'll have one in Charleston, and it'll change some of the dynamics. But right now, our international airports are Atlanta and Charlotte. That's a difference for us. That's a business difference for us.
But you have, to argument, use that idea that Charlotte might be a bookend. The other bookend would be the South Carolina Ports Authority. You have a Charleston port.
Correct.
And that's hard to beat.
Yes, it is. And, sometimes you're just lucky by geography, but we also have a great team down there. Jim Newsom and his team do a great job. I serve on that board, and it's marvelous to see what we're doing. We'll start the harbor deepening this month with an official ceremony and so forth. Been working on it for years. And it truly is one of the keys to our success. We have led the nation in foreign direct investment for like 4 out of the last 7 years on a per capita basis, which means the world looks at us and see us as a great place to do business. And one of the reasons is because of the port. They know they can move their goods in and move their goods out efficiently at good cost. And that's what businesses do, particularly manufacturing businesses. And that's where our growth spurt has been in manufacturing. Though I'm pretty excited about what we've been doing elsewise. I mean, it was just a couple of 3 years ago we did announcements around Charlotte. We did announced 7,000 jobs in one day, which was pretty exciting with the Lash Group and GT Tire and LPL. All of them are up and operating now. All of them are up into the thousands of people. GT Tire is now making, I think I got a number here somewhere on GT. They got about 1,000 workers there this year, and they're making about 30,000 tires a day. The plant just got completed about 6 months ago. And it's padded for another plant when they get to that capacity. We'll keep going.
One of the arrows in your quiver, I'll use that metaphor again, one of the arrows in your quivers, Mr. Secretary, has just been this idea that not only a great place to live, moderate climate, crossroads for so many things, is the idea of low energy cost. SCANA Santee Cooper going through a tough time, certainly in the General Assembly right now. How would you handicap an increasing cost of energy and how that would make your job harder, if that comes to fruition?
An increasing cost of energy would make the job harder because there are clearly manufacturers that are very energy intensive, some more than others. It depends. In fact, we've had certain companies who would only look in certain parts of the state because of energy costs in the past, and because they were big energy hogs, for instance. So, for instance, you could have a plant that needs an aluminum plant, for instance, can use hundreds of megawatts, where a BMW uses about 70.
That's hard to believe.
I mean, you can have intense industrial activity where the energy usage is not that great, and others, because of equipment, it's huge. So it just depends on the processes that they use. Just like some are very water and wastewater intensive, so you can only put them in places where you have that availability and that capacity. This issue going on with the utilities is a tough one. I mean, this failure at BC Summer is a pretty colossal one for the state. The General Assembly's taken it seriously. I think there's been a strong immediate reaction about it, but I think you'll see it calm down now as we try to sort it out. This is not just a short-term problem. This is something that needs to be thought out in terms of the long term. As far as our existing companies and others, these are all power territories, and their rates are set through a regulatory structure. So while the names of a company might change, that doesn't necessarily mean the rates are going to change in any appalling way. I mean, Duke bought Progress several years ago now, and so both the Progress side and the Duke side are still there, and they still have some rate differentiation between them, because historically you can't change electric rates that fast, and they're all based on certain formulas. So if SCANA changes to another company or tries to tough it out or whatever occurs, it's still a regulated company with a regulated footprint under the Territories Act and the way our states operate, both states, by the way.
Governor McMaster was one of the first ones that came out on the SCANA issue and was actively looking for a buyer, at least for Santee Cooper. If he does not get reelected and there's a change in the governor's mansion, how much does that create a lot of uncertainty around wrapping up this issue with SCANA, or would you expect that the State House is the State House driving that? Is the governor driving that? Is SCANA and or the lawyers driving that?
It's a little bit of all of the above, as you can imagine, in any kind of political environment like that. The governor has, obviously, the bully pulpit, has the ability to pull meetings together and bring the right people into the meeting, pick up the phone and call Lynn Good and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this, et cetera, et cetera. So those kind of conversations can occur on an executive level, pretty much one-to-one. The legislature has an enormous amount of control in both of the Carolinas in terms of something like that. As you look at SCANA, while it is a stock-held company, it still has to live with the regulatory structures that the General Assembly creates. So the Public Service Commissions in North Carolina and South Carolina are both created by the General Assemblies. And so the General Assemblies can say, we didn't like the way that happened, so we're changing the law, and prospectively it changes. And it can change the whole commission, can do whatever it wants to affect a change. In addition to that, you've also got the fact that a stock-held company is just that, and is a commodity, so to speak, and that's what's going on with Dominion saying, hey, we want to make an offer, and it being weighed as to whether that was a good offer. But the offer going through is somewhat contingent on the General Assembly not changing some of the rules in the direction that Dominion thinks would be adverse to their investment. I think this is a normal adult conversation. It just, it's complicated. Electrical rates are, oh my, one of the most complicated things I know. But it will settle itself out, just as most political discussions do. Santee, on the other hand, I think is a little bit different issue because, you know, it was created about 75 years ago as a public service authority to try to bring certain utilities to an area of the state that had none. So it goes all the way back to the old rural farm programs to turn on lights at farms. And so they own 2 lakes and dams and water systems and a lot of property, and they make power. So it's a different kind of vehicle, and it doesn't have a balance sheet like a stock-held company does because it is a state authority. It has certain types of latitudes. It's a more interesting thing to look at. And some people say, well, we ought to sell it, we'd make a lot of money. Well, it's got a fair amount of debt, which authorities do, Ports Authority, all of them do. That's one of the reasons they exist, for that purpose, so they can leverage money. If you have to convert that public debt to private debt, that's an expensive process. It changes the values pretty quickly. So it's a complex deal. It's going to be more complex than the SCANA one.
And there'll be a long tail on this, you think, to get it decided?
I think it will stabilize pretty quick, but there will be a long tail because there's a lot of debt that's got to get unwound one way or another. You know, you can look at it a number of ways. There is this nuclear debt that is going to be incurred.
And we've got about 20 seconds left.
All right, so someone's got to unwind that. Many of us think the private sector is better at unwinding that than the public sector.
And lucky for you, the private sector will wade in on that.
Correct.
Mr. Secretary, it's always nice to have you on the program. Thanks
My
for your
pleasure.
insight. And I know we don't play favorites on this program, but thank you for leading not just the agency, but the region in some pretty spectacular growth. You're one of the good guys, and good to have you back here.
Great to be here with you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching our program. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, BARINGS, Grant Thornton, Novant Health, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.